A 39-year-old bookkeeper in Bridgeport, Connecticut, disappeared in the spring of 1992 after leaving an undeciphered note on her kitchen table. 47 characters arranged in a grid of numbers, letters, and symbols that no one could read. Her landlady found it the morning after she vanished. Investigators found it. The FBI's cryptanalysis unit worked on it. 3 academic cryptographers, engaged at different points over 3 decades, worked on it and reached the same conclusion. The cipher resisted every standard approach, and the underlying language could not be determined. The note sat in a Connecticut State Police evidence archive for 31 years, decoded by no one. But in the winter of 2023, a 14-year-old boy in Portland, Oregon, found the case on a cold case website, became interested in the cipher because every previous attempt had assumed the wrong language, and spent 6 weeks in his bedroom running frequency tables and rebuilding the key from scratch, and sent an email to the Connecticut State Police with a decoded text. His methodology and his Python script, signed with his first name and his grade in school. He was right. And what Marta Vicks had written in that cipher, in a language only her mother had taught her, in the form she loved most, in the spring of 1992 when she understood she was in danger and trusted no one enough to say it plainly, was an address and 3 words of instruction, and a dead man's switch she had set and loaded and hidden so carefully that it took 31 years and one boy with the right instinct to finally find the trigger. But to understand what the cipher contained, and what was at that address, and why it still mattered in 2023 to people who had thought they were safe, you have to go back to Bridgeport in the spring of 1992. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Marta Vicks was. Bridgeport in 1992 was a post-industrial Connecticut city that had been losing its manufacturing base for 2 decades and had not yet found what would replace it. A city in the specific condition of American urban decline and stubborn persistence that characterized the northeastern mill towns of that era, where the old buildings still stood and the neighborhoods still held, and the people who remained did so with the particular determination of people who have decided that where they are is where they belong. Marta Vicks had arrived in Bridgeport in 1981, 2 years after leaving Budapest, and had built a life there with the methodical patience of someone who understands that a life is built, not given. She had emigrated in 1979 at 31, alone, through a contact in the Hungarian diaspora community in Vienna who had helped her obtain the paperwork. She had trained as an accountant in Hungary and had spent her first 2 years in the United States working whatever clerical work she could find while requalifying her credentials under American bookkeeping standards. By 1985, she had a permanent position at Dreher International, a small import-export company on the Bridgeport waterfront, run by a man named Anton Dreher, where she had worked for 7 years and kept the company's financial records with the precision and discipline she brought to everything. She was 39 years old in 1992. She had a second-floor apartment in a 3-family house on Seaview Avenue, where her landlady, Frances Osai, lived on the first floor. Frances was 56 when Marta moved in and had been her landlady for 11 years. In that time, they had developed the specific friendship of 2 women in different decades of their lives who share a building and find that proximity has produced something real. The kind of friendship that expressed itself in leftover cooking and borrowed umbrellas and conversations at the kitchen table that went longer than either of them expected. Marta had a shelf of puzzle books beside her reading chair. Crosswords, logic grids, cipher books, brain teasers in 3 languages. She was the person at her office who organized the break room puzzle calendar, and who had, on at least 2 occasions Frances knew of, written to the night magazine to point out an error in the Saturday crossword. She loved the form, the specific pleasure of a problem that had exactly one correct answer, and the patience to find it. Her apartment was tidy and particular in the way of a person who has organized her interior world to offset the disorder she cannot control elsewhere. She wrote to her mother in Budapest every month. Decode, 60, in 1992, still living in the apartment in Budapest's 8th district, where Marta had grown up. They wrote in Hungarian, the language Marta used only in those letters and in the cipher books she read, and occasionally, Frances noticed, when she was working through something difficult alone, in murmured phrases under her breath, as though Hungarian was the language of her private thinking. The last letter Marta wrote to her mother was dated April 18, 1992. She had left it with her outgoing mail in the box in the front hallway. It arrived in Budapest on May 9, 1992, 3 weeks after Marta disappeared. Decode received it on the same day she received the call from the Connecticut State Police. Frances Osei gave Marta a spare key when she moved in 1981, and Marta gave Frances one in return, said if I ever lock myself out, and Frances had kept it on her keychain, on the same ring as her own keys, for 11 years before Marta disappeared and 31 more years after. She had never locked herself out. On the morning of April 21, 1992, a Monday, Marta did not come downstairs at her usual time. Frances knocked on the upstairs door at 8. No answer. She used the key. She went in. The apartment was undisturbed, everything in its place, the bed made, the coffee maker cold, the puzzle book open to Saturday's crossword, halfway finished. On the kitchen table was a piece of paper with 47 characters arranged in a 6x8 grid. Numbers, capital letters, and 3 symbols Frances had never seen in any context. She had no idea what it meant. She called the police. Detective Samuel Birch of the Bridgeport Police Department took the initial missing persons report on April 21, 1992. He was 44 years old. Methodical and overworked in the specific way of a detective in a declining industrial city with limited resources and a caseload that had not shrunk with the city's population. He documented the apartment. He logged the cipher note into evidence. He photographed it and sent the photograph to the Connecticut State Police, who forwarded it to the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit in Washington. The crew's analysis, returned in 6 weeks, concluded the cipher used a non-standard symbol set inconsistent with known historical ciphers. Frequency analysis suggested a substitution cipher, with possible transposition elements. The underlying language could not be determined from the character distribution. The cipher was assessed as potentially solvable, with the correct key or language assumption, but no viable approach had been identified. The report was 3 pages. Its final sentence said, "Further analysis would require additional context about the subject's linguistic background or known interests in cryptography." Sam Birch noted the Hungarian background in his file. He noted that Marta had emigrated from Budapest. He forwarded the note to a Hungarian language specialist at the University of Connecticut, who reviewed it briefly and said that the character set did not correspond to standard Hungarian orthography, and that without a key, the underlying language could not be confirmed. The lead stalled. Birch kept the note in his active file for 2 years and then transferred it to the cold case unit when the investigation produced no further progress. Marta's employer, Anton Dreher, was interviewed twice in May of 1992. He was 56 years old, composed, expressed appropriate concern about his bookkeeper's disappearance, and said he had not noticed anything unusual in her behavior in the weeks before she vanished. He said she had been a reliable employee for 7 years. He said he hoped she was all right. He was not flagged as a person of interest. There was nothing in the 1992 investigation record to connect him to her disappearance, except proximity, which was not sufficient. The investigation found no witnesses, no physical evidence of a crime at the apartment. No confirmed last sighting of Marta after the previous Friday. The cipher on the kitchen table was the only thing she had left that was not ordinary, and it was undecipherable, and it stayed that way. Erzsébet Vikéz wrote to the Connecticut State Police for the first time in September of 1992. She wrote in Hungarian. A volunteer interpreter at the Hartford Police Department translated the letters. She sent 2 a year, on the anniversary of Marta's disappearance and on Marta's birthday, and they were placed in the case file. Every detective who handled the Vikéz case between 1992 and 2023 received at least one. The letters said the same things in different configurations, that Marta was not a person who would leave without telling her mother, that something had happened to her, that the cipher was important, that someone needed to find out what it said. The letters were translated and filed, and the cipher remained undecoded. Francis Osei never gave up the key. By 2000, 8 years after Marta disappeared, the cipher had been formally examined 3 times. The initial FBI assessment, a second review in 1997 by a Yale University cryptographer engaged by the Connecticut State Police, and a third in 2005 by a private cryptanalysis firm. Each examination failed for the same reason. All 3 had assumed the underlying message was in English or a Western European language with standard character frequencies, had found no match, and had concluded the cipher was either unsolvable or encoded in an unknown personal system. None of the 3 had tested Hungarian. Anton Dreher died in December of 2009 of cardiac failure at 73 years old. He had been investigated by federal authorities as part of a money laundering case involving his import-export network between 2003 and 2007, had been charged with financial crimes, had entered a plea agreement in 2007 in which he received a suspended sentence in exchange for cooperation, and had spent the last 2 years of his life in a reduced but comfortable retirement in Fairfield County. The 2007 federal investigation had involved his financial records, but had not connected him to Marta Vikéz's disappearance. The cipher had not been decoded. What Marta had placed in the storage unit had not been found. The account she had funded was still paying the annual fee, automatically, from the lump sum she had deposited in 1991. By 2015, Erzsébet Vikéz was 84 years old and still sending her twice-yearly letters to the Connecticut State Police from her apartment in Budapest's 8th District. The volunteer interpreter who translated them had been doing so since 2003. He had met Erzsébet once, on a trip to Budapest, and had brought her a photograph of the building on Seaview Avenue where Marta had lived, because Erzsébet had asked him what it looked like. She kept the photograph on her mantle. Then, in January of 2023, a 14-year-old boy in Portland, Oregon, found the Vikéz case on a cold case discussion board while researching historical cipher mysteries for a school project on the Zodiac Killer. His name was Eli Tran. He had been teaching himself Python for 2 years and had built several simple frequency analysis tools as programming exercises. He was the son of a software engineer and a pharmacist, a kid who found problems more interesting than answers, and who had the specific patience of someone who does not find it frustrating to work on something for a long time without result. He looked at the cipher and noticed immediately that every previous analysis had assumed English. He noted the subject's Hungarian background in the case file excerpts. He began building a Hungarian frequency table. The case had been cold for 31 years when a boy who loved puzzles found the cipher of a woman who had loved them too. Every story on this channel is built from weeks of careful research, tracing sources, verifying facts, treating real lives with the honesty they deserve. If that work matters to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop us a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Now let's get back to Marta. Eli Tran worked on the cipher for 6 weeks. He kept a notebook, a physical notebook, paper, which he said he used for cipher work because he thought better on paper, in which he mapped character frequencies across the 47-character grid, testing Hungarian phoneme distributions, testing for compound letters that Hungarian uses differently from English, and tracking every failed approach so he did not repeat himself. In the fourth week, he noticed a pattern in the symbol distribution that was consistent with the digraph frequency of Hungarian, the way certain letter combinations appear together at predictable rates in Hungarian text that they do not in English. He rebuilt the substitution key from that pattern. In the sixth week, on a Tuesday evening in March, he typed the decoded text into his notebook. He read it. He read it again. He sat for a moment and thought about what he was looking at, which was the last message of a woman who had disappeared 31 years before he found her cipher, and which was now, in his notebook, in plain text, readable for the first time. The message was in Hungarian with 3 phrases in English. It read, in translation, "I am afraid. What I know about A. D is in the place below. If I am gone, look here." Followed by an address, a storage facility on East Main Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut, unit number 114. And then one line, in Hungarian, that translated as, "For whoever is smart enough to find this." I hope it does not take long. It had taken 31 years. Eli emailed the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit on March 14, 2023. He included the decoded text, a full write-up of his methodology, and the Python script he had used for the final frequency analysis. He signed the email, Eli T., 9th grade, Portland, or Sergeant Rosa Mendez of the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit received the email on the morning of March 15th. She was 41 years old, had been working cold cases for 6 years, and had inherited the V-case file 18 months earlier. She had read the 3 failed cryptanalysis reports. She read Eli's email twice. She showed it to her supervisor without saying anything, just held it out for him to read. He read it. He said, "How old is this kid?" She said, 14. He said, "Forward it to the FBI." She forwarded it to the FBI's crew on March 15th. The confirmation came back on March 29, 2023. Eli Tran's Decode was correct. The methodology was sound. The underlying language was Hungarian. The message was as he had translated it. The FBI's response included a single additional sentence, which Rosa Mendez kept. It is not clear why previous analyses did not test Hungarian given the subject's documented background. She drove to Bridgeport the following morning. The storage facility on East Main Street still existed. Unit 114 was listed in the facility's inactive rolls under the name Erzbet Molnar, Marta's mother's maiden name with a variant spelling. The annual fee had been paid automatically from the funded account for 31 years. The account contained enough for 3 more years of payments before it would have lapsed. Marta had planned for 34 years. She had planned for a long time. She had hoped it would not take that long. The unit was opened with a court order on April 1, 2023. Inside, a fireproof document box, padlocked. Mendez's team cut the lock. Inside the box, a parallel set of financial ledgers for Dreyer International, covering 1985 to 1991, annotated in Marta's handwriting, with specific transactions highlighted in red pen and sourced to underlying documentation, invoices, wire transfer records, customs declarations, that she had copied from the company's files over 4 months, systematically, without anyone noticing. Alongside the ledgers, a typed summary, 7 pages, in English, dated February 1992. Titled, "What I Know About Anton Dreyer's Operation," and a handwritten cover page, in Hungarian and English, that said, "I am Marta Vix. I worked for this man for 7 years. If you are reading this, I did not make it out." Please use it. Anton Dreher had been dead for 14 years. He could not be prosecuted. But two men whose names appeared in Marta's documented ledgers as primary recipients of laundered funds were still alive. Karl Hoffmann, 71, living in Zurich, and Benedikt Reiser, 68, living in Vienna. Both had avoided prosecution in the 2007 federal case due to insufficient evidence. Marta's parallel ledgers, authenticated by the FBI's Forensic Accounting Unit as consistent with and corroborative of the original Dreher International records, provided what the 2007 case had lacked. In cooperation with Swiss and Austrian federal prosecutors, both men were charged with financial crimes and conspiracy in 2024, using Marta's documentation as primary evidence. Hoffmann entered a plea agreement in September 2024. Reiser was convicted at trial in November 2024. Marta's dead man's switch had worked 32 years after she set it. She had built it for Dreher, who was gone. It found Hoffmann and Reiser, who were not. Rosa Mendez called Erzsébet V. Kates in Budapest on April 2, 2023. She spoke through the interpreter, who translated in real time. She told Erzsébet what had been found: the cipher decoded, the storage unit opened, the ledgers recovered, her daughter's 7-page summary in the document box. She told her that Marta had been right about everything she had documented. She told her that the man Marta had been afraid of had died years ago, and that the people he had worked with were now being brought to account using Marta's evidence. Erzsébet V. Kates was 91 years old. She had been writing letters to the Connecticut State Police twice a year since 1992. She listened to the interpreter for a long time without speaking. When the interpreter finished, she asked one question. "Did my daughter write the cipher in Hungarian?" The interpreter told her yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Of course she did." That was her language for the things that mattered. Mendez also called Eli Tran's house in Portland. His mother answered. Eli came to the phone. Mendez told him the decode was confirmed. The storage unit had been found. The evidence had been recovered. She said the case would not have broken without him. She said he should know that. Eli said thank you and asked if the evidence would be useful. She said yes, very much so. He said that was good and that he was sorry it had taken so long, and Mendez said, "You were 14 years old. You got there." Marta Vikas built a cipher in the form she loved because she trusted that form to last and trusted that someone eventually would love it the same way. She was right. And it took 31 years. And the person who found the key was a 14-year-old boy who had never heard of her before January of 2023. She was 39 years old in the spring of 1992. She had a puzzle book open to Saturday's crossword, half finished, on her reading chair. She had a shelf of cipher books and a mother she wrote to every month, and a landlady who knew which drawer she kept her spare batteries in, and an apartment organized the way she organized everything. Precisely, practically, in a form that made sense to her. She had been afraid for months. She had done what she could with what she had. 7 years of her employer's financial records copied in secret, organized, documented, and hidden in the form she understood best. She had written the location in cipher because the evidence was only useful if it was found by someone who cared enough to work for it. Eli Tran cared enough. He spent 6 weeks on it. He kept a paper notebook. He tested every approach he could think of and did not repeat the ones that failed, and found the right language in the 4th week and the full decode in the 6th. He was 14 years old and had never met Marta Vikas, and found her cipher on a website, and worked on it because it was interesting, and because something in the case stayed with him in the specific way that some problems stay, the way certain puzzles refuse to let you go once you've seen them. Marta had written, at the end of her cipher, for whoever is smart enough to find this, I hope it does not take long. It took 31 years. It was found by the right person. Frances Osai is 87 years old. She still has the key on her keychain. When Rosa Mendez came to tell her what had been found, she listened to everything, and then she took the key off her ring and held it for a moment. She had carried it for 31 years on the same ring as her own keys, the way Marta had given it to her, for the day she might lock herself out. She had never locked herself out. She put the key back on the ring. She said, "I'll keep it a while longer." She did not explain this further, and she did not need to. The Connecticut State Police's Cold Case Unit has proposed, in its 2024 annual report, a formal protocol for linguistic background assessment in all undecoded cipher evidence, requiring that any analysis of encoded material include a systematic test of all languages documented in the subject's background before defaulting to English. The proposal is called the VK's Protocol in the unit's internal documentation. It is the first cold case protocol in the series named after a victim whose evidence was recovered not by a detective, not by a forensic analyst, not by a laboratory, but by a boy with a Python script and a paper notebook. And the right question: what if the language isn't English? Marta wrote her cipher in Hungarian because that was her language for the things that mattered. Do you think she believed someone would eventually find the right key? Or do you think she built the dead man's switch and accepted that it might never be triggered? Eli Tron was 14 years old, working alone on a cold case he found online, and he cracked what 3 professional cryptanalysis teams could not, because he asked a question they hadn't. What does it say about the gap between institutional expertise and the right question asked by the right person at the right time? And for those following the VK's protocol, if your background were documented in a case file, which languages, which forms, which specific ways of thinking would you want an investigator to test? Leave your thoughts below. We read every one. Justice found Marta Vix after 31 years, carried there by a 14-year-old who loved puzzles the same way she did. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description, and every one of them belongs to someone who deserved better. Thank you for watching.